We have some major developing news in both college football and the NFL, as we have now seen former Texas Tech QB Brendan Sorsby submitting for the NFL Supplemental Draft. We'll talk about it right here on Endzone Insights. Welcome back into Endzone Insights, where you can get the best takes from the next generation of football fans. I am your host, Darius Fitzpatrick, and this episode will be a combination of both the NFL and college football, as the story dives into both leagues. That story involves Texas Tech QB Brendan Sorsby, or now former Texas Tech QB Brendan Sorsby, as he now has submitted to be a part of the 2026 NFL Supplemental Draft. This comes after a legal case with the NCAA last week, where a local judge had given Sorsby permission to play in the 2026 college football season, despite Sorsby previously placing bets, not just a few bets, but thousands of bets, while at Indiana and Cincinnati University. Now, some of you may be wondering, why would Sorsby be going to the NFL if the judge gave him the all clear to play in college football this year? Well, that was because of the fact that the NCAA, the Big Ten, and even the Big 12 have been attacking Texas Tech and Brendan Sorsby. The NCAA has sent quotes saying how they have been very displeased with the results of the trial. The Big Ten wanting to ban playing Texas Tech in every single sport, and even some universities such as Georgia wanting to ban playing Texas Tech as well. Now this has all been news for over a week now, but it wasn't the final blow to Texas Tech and Sorsby giving out. The final blow was the Big 12, the conference that Texas Tech is in, wanting to file an injunction by a judge so that they would be allowed to punish Sorsby for his illegal gambling actions. Now, obviously, we would not know what the punishment would be exactly, but I think it is safe to assume that Sorsby would be suspended for multiple games, if not the entire season. Seeing this, Sorsby and Texas Tech must have decided that this was not going to go away anytime soon and thought that this needed to end. And while the best way to do that, while also allowing Sorsby to play football in 2026, was to go to the NFL Supplemental Draft for Sorsby. Now, I'm going to start off with the college side of things before getting into the NFL side of things and how it impacts Sorsby. And to start things off, this was a complete and total mess for the NCAA. The situation just showed that they no longer have the power to enforce rules as they once had. This was one of the biggest rules in college sports to break. It was considered a cardinal sin, and many other athletes before Sorsby have been punished severely by the NCAA for doing this exact same action. Now Sorsby had not just done it once, not twice, not even 100 times, but 9,000 times. He had broken one of the most valuable rules in college athletics thousands of times, and yet that wasn't enough for him to be found guilty by the judge, Ken Curry. He had broken the rules thousands of times. He was going to get away with it without any punishment, and the NCAA couldn't stop the ruling. Despite this ruling being ridiculed by many people, the NCAA and even me, there's nothing that they could do about it. The NCAA was completely powerless in this situation. And that just goes to show you how college sports as a whole now, players have more power than the organization that controls the sport. The only reason that the NCAA was still able to get what they wanted out of this whole ordeal was because of the fact that it was such an egregious decision by the judge, but that every other league had joined together in a sense to force Brendan Sorsby to go to the NFL. Without that, the NCAA does not win this ordeal. So I think that college sports are in some major trouble after this, because the NCAA got lucky with this. If it wasn't such a one-sided debate, then the NCAA would not have been able to do anything to stop this from happening. We saw this with Trinidad Chambliss earlier this year, where no other leagues thought there was anything wrong with it, and so despite the NCAA not wanting Trinidad Chambliss to play this year in college sports, he got his way and he was able to play this year. Another case like this could happen where without the support of the other leagues, then the NCAA is completely powerless. Players could do anything they would want, and there would be more chaos in college sports than we are seeing today, which some of you may find hard to hear because of how much chaos there is today. But there is a world where none of the rules that the NCAA sets are followed by athletes, and it's just complete chaos. If the NCAA wants to fix this, they need to create guidelines and get more power back from the players. At this point, it's just gone too far. The NCAA has to do something because if they don't, we lose the sport. We lose sports such as college football that we all love and cherish. Now, I'm going to move on from the political side of sports and get to the actual game. Starting off with Texas Tech. Texas Tech has kind of just been thrown into complete fire because of this whole gambling situation. That, let me remind you, they had no idea about when they signed Sorsby earlier this year. They actually didn't. Let me remind you as well that Sorsby actually hasn't played for Texas Tech at all. He only signed a deal with Texas Tech earlier this year. That was it. So Texas Tech essentially had to deal with everything going on with Sorsby, pay him $5 million just for him to never play a single game of football for them. A rough situation for Texas Tech, especially since this is a team that they believed could win the Natty, and Sorsby was going to be the key to that. Now they will go into the season with a quarterback question. The key for every team that is hoping to win the Natty every year is going to be having a stable QB. It doesn't need to be a first-round pick QB like Sorsby or like we see in past years with Fernando Mendoza, but the QB just needs to be a viable starter. We have seen this with Georgia and Stetson Bennett as they won a national championship 2 years in a row, and Ohio State with Will Howard as they also won a national championship 2 years ago. We don't know whether Texas Tech has that viable starter as of yet. Saying that, I know there will be some people arguing for Will Hammond. Understand that, yes, he did show flashes last year when Baron Morton, sorry if I messed up that name, but Baron Morton went down with an injury. However, he only started for 2 games. We haven't seen him be able to play a full season of college football yet. He also tore his ACL when they played Oklahoma State late in the season last year. So he's never been a full-time starter before, which in today's college football is almost needed, and is recovering from a major injury. Now, I may be young, but I've seen with many athletes that major injuries such as these take time. When an athlete first tries to perform again right after such an injury, they more often than not will not play to the level that they or fans hope for. Now, Will Hammond is expected to be ready to play by week 2 against Oregon State, which is not something that I am particularly worried about. It actually sounds perfect for Hammond to try and slowly get back into playing, but week 3 is going to be a real test. Houston will be heading to play Texas Tech in week 3, and while I do believe that Texas Tech should be able to win this game, Houston is a tough opponent that should not be slept on by fans. If Hammond struggles in that game, I could ultimately see them losing this game and hurting their chances at potentially winning the Big 12. Because let me remind you, BYU is right behind Texas Tech in the race for the Big 12. Now that is all worst case scenario, because I could also see Will Hammond being the viable starter that Texas Tech needs. Remember, Texas Tech was originally planning on just sticking with Hammond for the season until he tore his ACL late in last year's season, forcing them to look for Brendan Sorsby in the transfer portal. So while I do think Hammond could be a viable starter for the Red Raiders this year, I have great concerns about how he will play coming off that ACL tear. If he wasn't coming off that ACL tear, I wouldn't have as many concerns as I do now. Well, we'll take a quick break right here, but when we come back, we will discuss Brendan Sorsby and how this impacts his future with the NFL. Welcome back into Endzone Insights, and as promised, we will be discussing Brendan Sorsby's future in the NFL. As we all know, Sorsby has submitted himself to be a part of this year's Supplemental Draft. If you don't know what the Supplemental Draft is, it is a system in the NFL where players who were originally planning to play college football that season have to go to the NFL. The Supplemental Draft takes place at the end of July, and it essentially is a bidding war for players. A team would submit how much draft capital they would be willing to give up in the draft next season for a player, and whichever team submits the highest draft pick gets the player. Although, say the top three teams submit a second round pick for a player, then the player would be awarded to whichever team has the highest pick in the predetermined draft order that the NFL makes. I know this may feel like a lot of new information, but that is because the supplemental draft is rarely used. The last time it was used was in 2019, where the Cardinals used a fifth round pick on Jalen Thompson. Now you may be wondering, why is this year's supplemental draft such a big deal then? Well, that is because Brendan Sorsby is a highly sought after QB who was projected to be a first round pick in next year's NFL draft. Sorsby is a QB with a lot to like about him. Not only was he projected to be a first round pick in next year's draft, but it was also discussed if he came out in this year's draft, he would have also been a first round pick ahead of Ty Simpson. He is 6'3", 235 pounds. He is mobile and has an incredible arm strength, all qualities that the NFL teams love. Here is the biggest red flag, though, with Sorsby. It's not something that has to do with his on-the-field game. It is his gambling addiction. Now, Sorsby is going to work on it in rehab, and I truly do hope nothing but the best for him. Also, before I continue, I just want to say I am a major supporter of mental health, as I have several people in my life who have had trouble with their mental health. So I truly hope that Sorsby can get the help that he needs and just lives a life where he is not controlled by gambling anymore. But as much as I want things to work out for Sorsby, I know that it will be difficult for him because of his gambling concerns. There are already reports coming out, and understandably so, that NFL teams are concerned about Sorsby's gambling addictions and whether or not he can get those under control. Remember, he bet on his own team when he was a freshman at Indiana and placed 9,000 bets in total in college. NFL teams are going to be worried whether or not he can change and not hurt the integrity of the game. Because remember, gambling is so crucified in sports because of the fear that these bets can hurt the integrity of the game. No NFL team wants to have a player that is responsible for hurting the integrity of the game, especially when it is at the most important position in football. But his skill set is so good that a few NFL teams will more than likely take a chance on Brendan Sorsby in the supplemental draft, especially if they are a QB-needy team. Now, the teams that I think could potentially pick up Brendan Sorsby are the New York Jets, Cleveland Browns, Arizona Cardinals, Atlanta Falcons, and Pittsburgh Steelers. All are teams that have questions after the 2026 season with their quarterbacks. But the team I am specifically looking at in this situation are the Pittsburgh Steelers. Let me ask everyone this. What has been the Steelers' biggest issues in the last few years? The Steelers are average. Not good, not bad, just average. That all stems from the fact they have not had a franchise QB since Big Ben retired. So they always have a middle first-round pick where more often than not, there are no more legitimate first-round QBs left, leaving them with nothing. Now, this could be solved if the Steelers would just be willing to have one season below average, but the team is always wanting to win, even if it's hurting their future. And it looks to be the same thing this season. With the hire of Mike McCarthy and bringing back Aaron Rodgers, the Steelers are clearly trying to win now, and it will be more than likely that they end up having the exact same situation they are in every single year. A 9-8 record where they lose in the wild card round with the 21st overall pick in next year's draft. This could be this situation could be their ticket out of QB purgatory, though. This could help get them prepared for the future while also not forcing them to begin a rebuild. They could spend a pick next year for Brendan Sorsby, develop him behind Aaron Rodgers, then in 2027 he would be the full-time starter. This would be a win for the Steelers fans who've been wanting to draft a first-round QB and the ownership who still wants to be in the playoffs every single year. Sorsby would also not have to worry about the NFL suspending him however long they decide, because Aaron Rodgers would be in the fold to play for the Steelers the entire season. I'm sorry, but I just can't get past the thought of a genius QB play caller like Mike McCarthy and Brendan Sorsby. That feels like the perfect match for Sorsby as he enters the supplemental draft. Is much more stable than the other franchises I've mentioned and has a coach that can develop QBs. The Jets, Cardinals, and Browns all are franchises I do not trust to develop a QB. The Falcons are not what I would consider a mess of an organization like these other franchises, but similar to them, I would not trust them, or specifically Kevin Stefanski, to develop a QB after what we saw, what he did with the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation last year when it was just a complete mess where it was Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, then Dylan Gabriel, and then finally they decided to give Shedeur Sanders an opportunity. It was just a mess. Also, they have two other QBs on the roster in Tua Tagovailoa and Michael Penix, who both still have the capabilities to be a viable starter in the NFL. So I don't think the Falcons are in for this. But the final piece of evidence to show you why the Steelers are the best fit team for Brendan Sorsby involves the 2027 draft class. As we all know, the 2027 QB class is meant to be one of the best we have ever seen. The Jets, Cardinals, and Browns are all projects to be at, or projected to be at the top of these drafts and select a highly touted QB. I doubt they would risk spending a high draft pick for Sorsby when they could wait a year and get a QB who is worth a first round pick and doesn't have the issues that Sorsby has. I doubt the Falcons will be in the mix for a top 5 draft pick, but I could potentially see them having a top 10 draft pick where they could select a top tier QB. The Steelers are the only team I am looking at who I feel confident that will not have an opportunity to select a top tier QB in the 2027 draft class. So all that being said, I feel that the Pittsburgh Steelers would be the most ideal landing spot for Brendan Sorsby, and I feel should be the most likely team to take Brendan Sorsby in the supplemental draft. Well, that is going to wrap up this episode of Endzone Insights. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please send it to someone you know. It would really help out the channel. But until then, be safe, be happy, and live your best life.